Hello everyone. Today's case is another one that is going to make you extremely frustrated. It's a case of a missing American woman in South America, and it really reminds me of the case of Shanquella Robinson. So let's get into this case. Nancy Eng was a 29-year-old from sunny Monterey Park, California. She was an active fitness lover and was a law graduate from California State University. She loved yoga, hiking with her family, and cuddling her cat. Nancy's family saying that she was kind-hearted, had a big smile, and could talk to anyone about anything. She was a caring daughter, a loving sister, and a supportive friend. Nancy was also the oldest of 4 siblings. However, last month on October 14th, Nancy decided to take some time off from her busy work schedule as a school assistant for disabled students to go on a trip to Guatemala for a relaxing yoga retreat called Be the Change, which was organized by a Los Angeles yoga instructor named Eduardo Ramada. Now, she knew this instructor pretty well. She went to his classes in LA, and she'd actually gone the year before on this trip as well, and she loved it. She'd wake up every morning and spend time on Lake Atitlan by herself, which is located in a volcanic crater and said to be a popular tourist destination. And this year they planned even more activities on the lake, so Nancy was very excited about this trip. After arriving at the resort, Nancy ended up texting her family on a group chat, wishing one of her brothers a happy birthday, and told her family, and I quote, "I'll be safe, don't worry about me," end quote, before informing them that she was going to put her phone on airplane mode. A few days later, on October 19th, Nancy and a group of 10 other people headed out for a kayaking excursion on Lake Atitlan, which, as you can see from photos and videos, is an absolutely huge lake. But it's absolutely beautiful. It's very scenic. I could see how this would be extremely relaxing and meditative to be in this environment out in nature. However, this wouldn't be a scenic, relaxing experience for Nancy. The group would end up renting these kayaks from a shop that was located next to their hotel, and they'd head out on the water around 10:45 a.m. that day. Nancy was actually captured smiling and waving from her kayak on video, which I'll play for you now.
Nancy Eng's family says this is the last known video of her, now shared with rescuers, waving at the camera, taken October 19th, just before she disappeared. Her family says the 29-year-old went on this kayaking excursion in the remote area of Lake Atitlan, but she never returned.
However, I do think it's important to note all of the drama going on with the life jacket situation. Now, according to certain sources, they say that no one was ever offered life jackets or any instructions or training on how to use the kayaks, any safety tips, without any knowledge of how to properly use them safely. However, according to the owners of the kayak company, which we'll talk more about them later, they said that they offered the whole group life jackets, but all of them decided not to wear them. Which either way, this just seems like a bad situation waiting to happen when you have a bunch of people going out in deep waters on kayaks that they don't know how to properly use. These things can tip over easily. If you're not a strong swimmer and the currents get bad, I could see how this could turn into a deadly situation. At the end of the day, everyone should have been wearing life jackets, but for some reason they were not. Now, after they all got onto the lake and they began kayaking around, it seems like the whole group split off in their own directions. And within an hour of everyone getting on the lake, the waters began to get choppy. And unfortunately, this trip would turn into a nightmare for Nancy's family, because Nancy was scheduled to fly home a few days later on October 22nd. However, before that date could come, Nancy's family would end up receiving a phone call. And it was a very strange phone call. This is also one part of this case where the details start to get very confusing. But from what I've gathered, the retreat organizer, Eduardo, ended up being the one that contacted the family, but was very, very vague in what he told them. And he essentially said that Nancy had not come back, left it at that, and when the phone call ended, the family was very confused and very concerned. So the story goes that Nancy's father ended up calling around to the rest of the family, and then they ended up calling back the phone number that called them. This time, they were told something along the lines that Nancy had gotten into the water at Lake Atitlan, and no one had been able to relocate her since. So of course, this left the family with even more questions, wondering what happened to their loved one after they were just told that she had gotten into this giant lake and then disappeared. Nancy was last seen on that kayaking trip. However, it seems from all the sources that I read through, because again, some of the information on this case is confusing, that she was not reported missing for 24 hours later, which really raised a lot of red flags with the family and myself included and a lot of people on the internet. Because you think if this group of people, some who have known each other from back home, if one of them got separated and disappeared and wasn't back with the rest of the group, that they would have immediately noticed and, alerted someone to help. Again, this wasn't a huge group. This was less than a dozen people, or even at most a dozen people that were on this trip together. And even if they didn't know each other from back home, because obviously not everyone knew each other, they had spent the last few days together. This was a tight group that was doing yoga together. They were relaxing, they were meditating. You think they would have noticed if one of these people were missing and had gone missing while they were out on a lake kayaking. Yet, as we will learn, no one seemed to be concerned. On October 20th, authorities began searching for Nancy. However, it seemed like they would immediately rule her disappearance as a drowning. 72 hours later, Nancy was still not found. However, it seems like Nancy's kayak was found, but there was nothing on it or near it or around it to lead them to what happened to Nancy or where she was. This is also around the time frame when the naval team would end up pulling back the resources and essentially telling the family that they would have to continue searching on their own, which seems like a lot to ask for a family in a different country to have to do. But by October 24th, Nancy's family ended up hiring an extensive team of private helicopters, boats, divers, and drones to go search for her. And in the meantime, the entire group that had been on this trip with Nancy had seemingly left the country early. They hadn't helped search for Nancy. They didn't report her missing as far as anyone could figure out. And none of them were cooperating and helping out the family figure out what happened to their loved one. Nothing. No one was talking, especially since now the police had essentially just left it up to the family to figure out and investigate on their own. And this included a woman named Christina Blazik, who was apparently the last person to have seen Nancy alive. So let's talk about Christina for a moment, because Christina is from San Bernardino County and is a public defender. So she clearly knows her rights and she knows when not to speak and when to speak. However, Christina has never directly spoken to the public or the family or anyone, and she is now relying on her attorney to speak to everyone on her behalf. So after weeks and weeks of no answers, Christina's attorney finally has spoken out, and he has released a statement on her behalf saying, and I quote, "To say my client hasn't done all she can do is not true," end quote. Because according to Christina's attorney, Christina has in fact spoken to the Guatemalan authorities, saying, and I quote, "Miss Ng and my client did not go anywhere together. Instead, they happened upon each other while on the lake and began to chat to each other. While out in the water, Miss Ng decided she wanted to go swimming. Miss Blazik allegedly tried to stop Miss Ng from entering the water because it was rough out there and there was a good current," end quote. So essentially what this attorney is saying is that Christina and Nancy didn't go out on the water together and, weren't kayaking together on this water, but in fact that Christina was going along and they just kind of happened upon each other in the water. And then Nancy told Christina that she wanted to go swimming. Christina told her not to, but then Nancy jumped in anyways. From there, allegedly, Christina has said through her attorney that Christina tried to get a hold of Nancy's kayak because after Nancy got in, it started floating away, and that she took her leg out of her own kayak and put it into Nancy's kayak and then tried to push it back towards Nancy. But then she said she lost control of the kayak, and when she turned around to get the kayak back and looked back, Nancy had just disappeared, had just vanished. And then her attorney goes on to say that after this, Christina went and got help and a distress call was sent out. Now, all of this is very confusing because there seems to be nothing to back it up, allegedly, in my opinion, and it's very confusing. Now, I'm not saying that Christina Blazik did anything. I'm just saying that she's had a whole month to come up with this, and it's just weird, in my opinion. Because what was this distress call? There's no information with this. Christina's attorney would go on to say, and I quote, "Apparently that lake is known for having people drown on it," end quote. They're also holding very firm that no one fled the country and that Christina spoke to authorities in Guatemala before she left the country. But I mean, here's the thing. As I said, there's a lot of things that are very confusing with this case, and there's a lot of things that seem contradictory and don't make sense. Now, I can play devil's advocate and say that, the moral thing to do would have been for this whole group to stay and help search, and that's what someone should do, especially with someone that they've been spending all this time with, even if they didn't know her that well. The average person, even if they don't know someone, they still want to try to help. But again, I feel like they're trying to make it sound like no one on this trip really knew Nancy. But as far as I've researched and I've seen, she went to the yoga classes that the instructor that was running this whole trip held in LA. So she knew him. She had known him for, a certain amount of time. They had spent days together on this trip for basically 24/7 doing yoga and all of this meditation and stuff, which, usually makes people bond. You'd think since they're all on this trip that they'd have a lot in common, so they would have gotten to know each other pretty well. However, it seems like everyone's trying to distance themselves from Nancy for some reason. And again, if I'm playing devil's advocate, maybe it's a financial thing where their flight was coming up and they needed to get on it, so they couldn't, extend their flight and extend their hotels and stay there and help search. That I could understand. Not everyone has the money to do that, and that's understandable. In a perfect world, everyone would be able to stay no matter what the financial cost and do what they needed to do or wanted to do. But, the world isn't perfect. Not everyone has the finances to be able to stay longer on a trip or, take more time off of work. However, that doesn't seem to be what happened. According to the family, they received a 100+ page report from the Guatemalan prosecutor's office. In this report, the family claims that there was no direct witness statements from Christina or any official records of any statements from anyone on this trip, despite Christina's attorney claiming that she did speak to the authorities there. On top of that, Lee and Elaine Beal, who are the owners of that company where the group rented the kayaks from, claimed that when the group returned back from the lake, they were all acting strangely and they refused to talk to anyone after they returned from the lake without Nancy. And they claim that the group then skipped town. Lee sang, and I quote, "When the group returned, there was only 8 that returned, but we could see in the distance, a distance about 100 yards, 2 single kayaks. We watched as they continued paddling until we lost sight of them." End quote. Now, these 2 kayaks are assumed to be Christina and Nancy's, who had broken away from the group that wanted to get off the lake, and they stayed out there longer. Lee continued by saying that Christina eventually was ushered onto shore by the host of the group, aka Eduardo, and Christina emerged from the lake looking upset, but Nancy and her kayak were not with her. Now, the next day, Elaine and Lee ended up contacting the hotel because the group hadn't paid for any of their kayaks, and they were actually informed that the entire group had left, meaning that the group left about 8 to 12 hours after Nancy disappeared, and they actually left a day early, which means that they all had to change their flights to leave a day early right after one of the members in their group disappeared, which is why this really reminds me a lot of the Shanquella Robinson case, where something happened to her, she was found dead and reported dead on their vacation, and everyone dipped as soon as this happened. And then after that, no one spoke. So this leads me to wonder if they left so abruptly and clearly no one knew that Nancy was missing at this point, because if there were all of these search efforts happening on the lake to find her, the owners of this kayak shop would have known. They literally were on the lake pretty much. So they would have seen all of this happening. And you'd assume that they would have told the reporters and the news and stuff like, yeah, this woman was missing. And then we found out that she was the one that was from this group. But no, they're saying that they had no clue anything had happened. All they knew was that this group returned, something seemed weird, and then when they contacted the next day to get their payment, they were told that everyone had left, didn't pay, they just left town and flew back to the US. So clearly no one had contacted the authorities at this point. That's what that means, in my opinion. So that leads me to the conclusion that by the next day, if everyone had left, when were the authorities called, and when did any of these people in this group, including Christina, talk to police then? Because according to Christina's lawyer, she spoke to the Guatemalan police. Now, maybe she did speak to the police, but maybe she spoke to the police on the phone from California. Is that what happened? Because that is not detailed. It's just said that she's spoken to the police, but it doesn't say when she spoke to the police. You know what I mean? And that again leads me to this whole moral dilemma from this group. If Nancy really did just go out on the lake and accidentally drown, why was everyone acting so sketchy? Even if they had to leave early, if someone from your group suddenly disappeared and you couldn't find her right away, why wouldn't you at least inform someone to keep an eye out for her? Why didn't they, when they returned to the kayak company to return all of their kayaks, say hey, one person from our group is staying out there, or we haven't seen them in a while, just keep an eye out on them just in case something happens. Why wouldn't you at least say something to someone? No one notified anyone. Everyone seemed to keep quiet. These 2 owners who, in my opinion, as far as we know, don't have anything to gain from lying in this, said that something seemed up with Christina. She seemed upset. The group seemed very hush-hush. Something weird was going on. They seem to have gotten a weird vibe from the group. And if this was an accident, why wouldn't you just come out and say it was an accident? If things happened, in my opinion, the way Christina says they happened, where Nancy jumped in the water, She disappeared in the water. Why wouldn't you immediately start screaming for help? Why wouldn't you get to shore, ask to go help find her? Why would you wait at all to say something? It just doesn't make sense to me. If this was an accident, again, I'm not saying anyone in this group did anything nefarious, but what I'm saying is they're acting as if they did, which makes no sense to me. If this was an accident, why wouldn't you just immediately go get help? And I understand Christina being an attorney, and I understand lawyering up. If you're the last person to see someone, sure, it makes sense. But if you're on a lake with someone and they jump in the water and drown, how is that in any way possible going to get you in trouble? That's what I don't understand. Why wouldn't you immediately just get help? It's like they're making themselves look guilty for no reason if they didn't do anything, which is the most confusing part of this whole case. Just the way this entire group has acted. Why? If this was simply an accident, why are they making themselves look so guilty? Why leave the trip early and reschedule? Why not tell anyone? On top of that, this is another thing that really confuses me with this case. Now, of course, I am not an expert. You can see that. However, I do unfortunately have some experience with a situation like this. So I did have a cousin who ended up going out on a lake by himself in a boat, and he ended up going missing. Now, no one knew what happened to him. His boat was found by itself, and of course, everyone was wondering what could have happened to him. He was actually on his way to work, and he decided to go across the lake on his boat because it would have been faster than, going all the way around. And they searched and searched and searched for him, and they could not find him. Now, 2 weeks later, his body ended up surfacing and washing up on shore of the beach. And from what I remember, they came to the conclusion that the waters were rough and he most likely fell, hit his head, fell in the water and drowned. And now here's the thing. In my cousin's case, his body eventually rose to the surface and he washed up. So it makes me wonder if Nancy simply drowned in the water, why hasn't her body, rose to the surface by this point and washed up somewhere or been found floating? Because it has been over a month at this point. Now, again, I'm not an expert, so I don't know if water temperatures or if her body got caught on something as it sunk. There's probably a lot of factors that could change in that. And again, they have searched the waters very extensively. They've tried to in this lake, but again, this lake is humongous and it gets deep in some parts. So could she have sunk to a spot and got caught on something because of the currents pushing her body? I'm sure that's possible. But it just makes me question if it simply was a drowning. Why didn't her body resurface? Again, there could be other reasons why it might not. But what I did really find odd with this case, it seems like it was the hotel that they were staying at that ended up trying to locate Nancy. And when they couldn't locate her, they were the ones to report her missing. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I gathered. Because again, this case is quite confusing. So if this is true, that means that Nancy wasn't reported missing for over, again, 24 hours after she went missing. And it wasn't by the group she was with. Some who were with her right before she went missing. And instead, this group left early without her right after she disappeared. And it was up to the hotel to report her missing. And in my opinion, I think out of anyone who should have reported her missing, it should have been the leader of this group to have reported her missing. And again, this man is named Eduardo Ramada. And he also goes by Yogi Eddie on social media. And he is a yoga and meditation instructor in LA, as I've mentioned. Again, from what I have seen, Nancy went to his classes quite often. She knew him for at least a year before, if she's gone on this trip with him before or the year before. This is someone who she knew to some capacity, that she trusted to go to a whole different country with. And if he was the responsible for running this whole excursion, you think he should have reported her missing when she wasn't with the group. But he didn't, which I just find so weird. Not only how immoral is that, but how unprofessional is that to have run this whole excursion where you're taking people to a whole different country. They're trusting you and relying on you to run all of this and be concerned for their safety there and taking care of them. And then one of your members in this very small group goes missing and you just dip and leave the country and don't say a word. It's just so weird. Again, I'm not saying he's done anything. It's just weird. And since he's gone back, I've seen that he's privated his social medias. He's allegedly scrubbed all information or photos of him and Nancy together. I've also seen allegations that he's blaming the family and those who bring Nancy up for making him look bad. It's just odd. I don't know. Everyone on this trip, their behavior is just odd. And of course, the family is also extremely upset by everything going on. They're also upset by the police essentially telling them that they had to arrange their own investigation, even though that should be the police's job. They've also claimed that they attempted to contact Christina on multiple occasions, but she essentially just ghosted the entire family. Nancy's father has also been waiting by his phone, waiting for a ransom call, because they don't even know what to expect at this point. Like, everything is possible, it seems. Nancy's sister has also been seen crying on television, begging for help and information on the news.
Your first thought is it a potential drowning? But then the question comes, if it is a drowning and nothing nefarious was done, why aren't witnesses coming forward?
Yet no one from that trip has spoken out. On top of that, Christina's attorney has come out and said that she was traumatized by the incident and needs time. But if she didn't see anything happen and she simply turned away to get the kayak and turned around and Nancy had vanished, what is she traumatized by? On top of that, isn't the family traumatized by having their loved one disappear? How traumatized can you be that you can't contact the family to say, like, anything, to even say, like, offer your condolences to them? That's what gets me. This group is just so weird. Christina essentially claims through her attorney that she didn't really see anything happen, but then she's traumatized. I just don't get it. Now, the FBI has eventually joined in and helped the family now, and at this point, they're not aware of any evidence of foul play and have said that witnesses are cooperating, but it's taken at least a month for all of this to start happening, which is extremely unfortunate. Now, as always, there's going to be tons of theories online, but I just want to talk about one of them today because it's one that I think could be plausible some way, somehow. Because I've been sitting here for the last week while I've been researching this case, trying to figure out if this group is innocent, why they acted so strangely and left the way they did. And I think this theory could answer that. And it is a theory that this group was using some kind of mind-altering drugs during their trip under the guise of growth and new experiences or ego death. This does happen a lot, I feel like, on trips like this. And if there is a possibility that this was the case, did the group panic and end up leaving thinking that they might get charged with something like manslaughter if she had died while under the influence? Allegedly, of course. Now, I could see how that would make sense. It makes a lot more sense to them just leaving for no reason and just being complete a-holes and not caring about the well-being of someone else. But again, that's just a theory and we have no proof. There's really not much information on anything. So on top of that, Nancy's family did say that Nancy was a good swimmer. So if there was a chance that she did accidentally fall off of her kayak, you think that, Christina would have held out a paddle or something to help her and try to scream for help. But no, according to Christina, Nancy jumped in the water willingly. She turned around to get the kayak, turned back, and Nancy had vanished. She didn't say anything about Nancy struggling in the water or the currents pulling her off or anything like that, which is just weird. The fact that she says she turned around, she was gone. I don't know. It's just such a weird case. Now, Nancy's family does have a GoFundMe, and I will have it linked down below if you are able to contribute. I did see that they've already met their goal, but they've left it up just in case if anyone else wants to donate. And honestly, even though their goal was very high and it was met, having to pay expenses for search efforts and for the family to fly back and forth, that stuff is extremely expensive. So I'm sure every penny could help. To this day, Nancy has still not been found, and we have no other answers other than Christina's statement through her attorney of what happened to her. No one is still really speaking. At minimum, this was just a group that has some really bad morals, doesn't care about the life of someone else, that made some very bad, questionable decisions, and made themselves look guilty in the process. And I really do think if that's the case, they should really look inwards, considering they're supposed to be these yogi fanatics, mind, body, spirit. They went down there to have a relaxing, euphoric trip, yet they seem to be really disgusting on the inside if these were their choices and actions. At worst, something darker was going on at play here, and something really did happen to Nancy other than her just simply drowning. But what I want to know is how you all feel about this case and this situation and what is happening. Also, if there was any information that I did not include, please let me know down below and let's have a discussion about it. As always, I will keep you updated as more information comes out in Nancy's case. I hope you all stay safe out there, lock your windows and doors, and I hope to see you in the next video.